What's going on, guys? Welcome back. In today's video I'm going to tackle this pesky oil leak I've been having on this side of the engine, which is caused by this little gasket, which is the oil housing gasket, which I think almost any BMW model that you may own will encounter this at some point in their lifetime. I'm already doing this for a second time since I owned this car. Last time I did it was like 5 years ago, and here we go again. I'm back at it again. It started leaking again, and need to address it because it's quite annoying. So it's a little bit time-consuming job, but it's not too hard, so stick around and I'll show you what's involved. I mean, it's kind of ridiculous if you ask me, because this is like $4 or $3 part, and you have to take off quite a few things to get this replaced. With that being said, you could technically do it without removing the airbox, but I'm also planning on replacing the rear throttle position sensor, which is on the other side, and therefore I need to remove the airbag. So I'm just gonna do it at the same time I'm doing the oil filter housing gasket. So first, remove the cabin filter housing, then we're gonna remove the airbags. To remove the airbags, this little tool is very handy. I have found from prior experience, because it has the right grip. All I do is squeeze it, and it releases the hold. Removing the airbags, just don't forget the two 10mm bolts that hold the airbags in front. Obviously mine is a little bit different than the standard one because it's the carbon airbags, but the mounting is the same. There we have it. Upon removing the airbox, we could immediately locate the rear throttle position sensor, which is right here. So I'm just gonna replace this bad boy real quick with this OE genuine one. It's the same thing as factory, and sometimes they are held by a Torx, but in this case mine is held with some regular Phillips screws. So I'm just gonna undo them real quick and unplug the connector and be on my way to the filter housing. Nothing to it, but mine is original, by the way, with 165,000 miles on it, so it did last longer than most of them do. There it is. That's the original one. In comparison, new one looks much better. This is, I've been through a lot, I can tell you that. Slide it back on, and it should be good. Plug it back in, and that's it. We accomplished one thing of this project already. Alright, moving on to this. Starting to remove the housing, you want to start with removing the belt, but before so, you want to loosen the bolts for the power steering pulley. That way, because they are nicely held tight by the belt. So before you take off the belt, just loosen them, so that way you could easily remove the pulley. You will need an 8mm hex just to put a pressure on a tensioner, and release it so you could slide off the belt. After you accomplish that, you want to remove the auxiliary pulley, because we need to dismount the alternator to get to the rest of the bolts. The alternator is held by two 16mm bolts. The bolts removed, you could just move it to the side so that way you have access to the rest of the bolts. And next you're gonna take a 6mm hex and remove the oil cooler line. Have a rag maybe. There'll be some oil dripping. Also, you wanna take a 13mm and loosen the top of the oil filter housing. That way the oil that's here flows down into the oil pan. That way you don't have a big mess when you unbolt the whole thing. Now that you have the alternator out, by the way, the alternator, the positive cable is held by a 17mm nut, and this loosened, this is where you need to tackle the power steering pump, because you need to remove these two nuts. In order to do so, you need to loosen or take off the pulley, which that's why it comes handy if we did it before, because now you can just take them off by hand and remove the pulley. Otherwise you'll be struggling to rotate it or loosen it, because the whole wheel is free. So now you could take these, I believe these are 13mm bolts, and then we could start addressing the actual oil housing. And I loosen this, that way the oil already has flown down. Alright, with that out of the way, we could tackle the actual housing. There's 6 13mm bolts. They're different lengths, so be mindful of that. Now is the fun part. We could start pulling the housing off the engine block. And make sure you disconnect this oil sensor. And we're almost out, almost. Yeah, there we are. Pesky leak that I had going on for quite some time. We're gonna address it now. Got the oil housing in the oil pan. Not bad idea to clean it beforehand. I actually had a leak going here, it looks like, before I noticed, before I already cleaned it a little bit. But yeah, and at the same time, if your idler probably looks not in the best of shapes, then it'd be a good idea to change it, which I'm gonna do, because the bearing looks kind of dry. So before it seizes, I'm gonna address that issue as well. Pop the gasket. It is kind of stiff, for lack of better wording. Make sure there's no debris. Clean it thoroughly and then place a new one in. So we'll go only one way, so you really can't mess up with this. There it is. Notice I am trying to keep the bolts in. That way I don't have to remember which goes which is totally doable. Now moving on to the side of the engine, obviously you want to clean everything up over here, and before you put the housing back on, I like to run the mating surface with some Scotch-Brite pad. That way I have certainty that you have flat mating surface, because guess what, if it's not flat it will leak. So and you don't want to be doing this twice, trust me. So I want to make sure that that the mating surface is nicely scuffed up and it's flat as it could be. Once everything is clean, all it is to do is just reinstall this bad boy back in it. Make sure that the gasket does not fall out. And I still have my bolts in there, so they did not fall out. Just kind of slide it right up there and torque him down to 22 Newton meters, and reinstall everything in the reverse or have a good time to do oil change at the same time. Nicely torqued, and follow on with reinstalling the rest of the components. And that is pretty much it. The housing is all buttoned up. I put the pulleys back on. There's not much to it. It's pretty simple, but it's kind of a time-consuming job. Reason I changed the rear throttle position sensor is because I get a little bit of a started getting a little bit of a hesitation with light throttle, and I'm not having a check engine light, and I heard that might be one of the reasons. And since I had the airbox out, I wanted to address the rear sensor because I don't feel like changing it later if that happens to be the bad sensor. So I just replaced it just for the safe being with a new one, since the other one was original. That way, if that wasn't the culprit and this one is, then that takes literally a minute to take off and put a new one in. So we'll take it from there. But from what I heard, when you get a slight hesitation, and then I looked on my torque app, when you're having your throttle position on display on, it will sometimes it would show that there's a 5% throttle, and my foot would not move off the pedal, and then it will all of a sudden drop to 0, and I get a hesitation. So I'm assuming the sensors for the throttle positions are going bad. Therefore I replaced the rear one first, and we'll move on from there. Yeah, but there's not much to it anymore. All left to do is put the airbox on and take it for a test drive. If you guys enjoyed this, was helpful, give a like, consider subscribing, and now we'll catch you on the next one.